On today's Faith versus Culture, we're joined by Governor John Kasich talking about how communities of faith have a responsibility to truly shape and transform culture. That and more is coming up.
To have sex before you marry is a bad idea.
Don't tell me there's no such thing as gun violence.
That just depends on your definition of when life begins.
There are problems of sin and habit that cannot be solved outside the person of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Welcome to this week's episode of Faith versus Culture here on the CBN News Channel. We're joined by a special guest today, Governor John Kasich. Governor Kasich, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's in the middle of this fun media tour in regard to my book, and I'm just having a ball.
Well, it's great to have you here with us today. And the first thing I want to ask you is, as somebody who has been in pretty much every political office you can be in, you've been in Congress in D.C., nationally, you've run for president, and of course, you've been the governor of Ohio, and faith has been a common thread in your life and in your career. Talk about how faith has been kind of an anchor for you.
Well, I would say the most important thing was the evolution that I had and internal revolution I had in 1987 when I lost my mother and father and was in a very dark place. And I spent a period recovering through that in terms of figuring out exactly who I am, my weaknesses, my strengths, and at the same time, where I stood vis-a-vis the Lord himself. As a boy, I had been, I was a Catholic boy involved in many activities in the church, but like a lot of people, I drifted away when I went to college. This gave me a chance to kind of renew exactly what I thought about that. And that was 37 years ago, Trey. And, I've come through that fiery storm without scars, fortunately, thank the Lord. And I have dedicated a large part of my life to trying to kind of get in sync with him.
Yeah.
And it's been, as I say, an evolution and maybe some ways a revolution. And I feel every day that I'm a screwball, hypocrite and everything else. But every day I know that when I plug in, I have sort of a superpower as opposed to I never plug in. So I try to plug in and understand what he wants each day.
Talk about the role of forgiveness and having both of your parents fatally struck by a drunk driver. What has forgiveness been like for you lived out over the years?
Well, it's interesting you asked that question because the first chapter in this Heaven Help Us, this new book, is about the shootings down in Charleston, where at a prayer meeting, a man murdered 9 people. And when he was up for arraignment, the family members went to the courtroom and said that they would forgive him because that's what the Lord would want. That is a well-known story, but I thought I can't escape it. The forgiveness involved, and forgiveness is a long road. Sometimes it happens immediately, and then you kind of wonder about it, and it's described sort of the travel that one goes through in the chapter of this book. For me, I was extremely bitter when this drunk driver killed my parents. And for a few years, I was always, if I thought he was going to come up on parole, my sister and I would write a letter. But at some point, it dawned on me that if that guy could turn back the hands of time, he would. But he didn't want to do that. He didn't want to have that happen. And so I guess that led to a certain forgiveness. And when I was governor, I had a family. There was a man up for execution, and I paused the execution. I can't remember if I paused it or if I just committed him to life in prison, and the family was outraged. And they came in to see me, and I told them this story. And they came in enraged, and they left in a much different place. Yeah, I don't think I've really ever told anybody that before, but and we look at our families today, the fighting that goes on, politically or over the will, or God, somebody snubbed me or whatever. And, we got to forgive. It's our family members. And, we all have difficulty with it. I was telling a great friend of mine who had, his brother had taken care of the father, and there was a bitterness that rose in the family because one was doing so much more than the others. And my friend said, I should have done more. And I said, well, why don't you call your brother and say, you did great and I didn't do as much, and I hope you'll forgive me. It's changed the whole relationship in that family.
Wow.
Well, again, we're all screwballs, or I'll be lead screwball, but I don't know. It's the way we have to. We're going to hold grudges and all that. It doesn't work. It makes us smaller as opposed to bigger.
Yeah, 100%. Look, I think we talk a lot about in our society over the years, and we're talking a little bit less about it now than we were maybe 2 years ago, but cancel culture has been this huge thing. And I think really what it is a lack of forgiveness and a lack of seeing the humanity in our fellow man and woman. So talk about how forgiveness is really kind of at the center of cultural redemption.
Well, to me, faith in God means two things. It means love God, love your neighbor. And sometimes we have trouble doing both. And but when we do both, it seems as though we begin to walk on the sunny side of the street. It seems as though we've kind of lifted ourselves. And today this country is so polarized. And actually, when I knew this book was coming out Easter week, I sort of felt, well, that's great timing. People will be tired of all the politics. And what I found is they're not. We're still in our silos. We are still in a place where we don't respect people's opinions often enough. And I hope this book is going to be a path for people to get beyond that. Because I told somebody the other day, if you see somebody who's caught in a snowbank and 2 or 3 people jump out of different cars to push them out, when you're pushing them out, no one's asking, who'd you vote for? Are you a Republican or a Democrat?
Right.
And then once you push them out, everybody gives a high five, and all of a sudden we kind of become friends. And when you become a friend, then you can tease each other about your political views or your moral, cultural views or whatever. We're better when we're unified. I like to say, if we divide, we shrink. If we unify, we grow. I'd rather grow than shrink myself.
Why do you think that is such a phenomenon in human nature, to silo ourselves and to pit ourselves against one another? And what's the remedy to that?
Ego. It's ego. I've talked to you earlier about Helmut Thielicke, who wrote a great book called Our Heavenly Father. It's a collection of sermons he gave when he was preaching during the war, when his own church was being bombed. It's an incredible story, and his sermons are amazing. And that's what trips us up. We're pride, ego. We all have it, and we're not going to escape it. The question is, can we figure out how to turn the pilot light down on it? We all have big egos, but at the end, I just lost a lifelong friend this week. I always said he was my guardian angel, always encouraged me. We loved him. My wife and I loved him. My wife would visit him regularly when he became ill. He's gone. What were the ego spats about, at the end? So to some degree, we kind of got to think about the end which is interesting, about the end to figure out how to navigate the today.
Yeah. Well, I know your new book, Heaven Help Us, can serve as kind of a guide to accomplishing those things. And we're going to fit in a quick break, Governor Kasich, but we'll be right back. So everybody stick with us for more of Faith versus Culture with Governor Kasich. Welcome back to Faith versus Culture. We're joined by Governor Kasich, which Governor Kasich, I have to say, Dan and I were just messaging with each other, and we are both, I think, in agreement. And Dan, for people listening or watching as our producer for the show, you might be one of the most pleasant guests that we've had on this show before. So we're just, where does that joy come from? Why is that something that's so important
as we
for
know,
you?
Trey, Dan has a face for radio. That is why he is not on. Look, I'm actually a pretty happy guy, except when my wife picks on me, which she does regularly. It's okay. I'm just laughing because my wife is here. I'm telling you, I think promoting this book is just, it's got air under my wings, I don't know. It's an energy level that I really enjoy. And of course I love to talk, and so I get to talk about faith, and I get to talk, and I get to listen to myself, and it's all good.
Well, okay. So when you're looking at the title of the book, Heaven Help Us, we talked about this a little bit ago before the show. It almost reads like a prayer. So tell us a little bit about the inspiration for the title alone.
It just came to me. I always wondered how did bands come up with these great titles and these great songs, and this Heaven Help Us, it just occurred to me, and I had to fight for it because people said, well, that's negative. I said, there's two ways to look at the title: Heaven Help Us, or Heaven Help Us. So it's pretty simple. Then on the subtitle under that, they wanted to put something in about our government. I said, strip it all out. This is not a book about politics. This will remedy the political situation if people read it. And as I have said earlier, I thought when the book came out, people would be ready for a break, that they would find, hope here and inspiration. But people are so locked in their silos. There's so much, I only want to hear what I want to hear. Anybody else that doesn't agree with me is wrong, and I don't like them and all that. But this book, I hope, can serve as an icebreaker where people, have lots of hopes and dreams. I don't care what party you're in. If you see people have, inherently some compassion. If you have compassion about people who are human trafficked, if you have compassion about the homeless, if you have compassion for people who are hungry, if you have compassion for those who are involved in foster care, if you have compassion for those who can't really read and can't advance themselves, this is a playbook for how to get involved and get inspired by people who have used faith institutions, both Christian, Jewish, and Muslim, be able to use those institutions or work with those institutions to get some material support and to get some community together or some grouping together so you can do it and take these things on not alone. I would tell you one interesting story, and it's the story about autism. And a woman in New York realized that her autistic son, who was aging, was going to have a place to live. And she worked with her church and other churches and support from these churches to build some group homes. Now, there's a woman in Westerville, and Dan is operating out of Westerville, who has an autistic son. And one of her great worries is, what happens to my son when he gets older? And I told her, when this book comes out, she can read it. It provides some way in which she can do things. And if she's in a church, talk to the church about helping to build some group homes in Central Ohio. And if you don't belong to a church, join one, and let them know what your passion is. And you'd be surprised at the kind of support you can get. And it's frustrating. Most of these people who are bringing about big changes in this book had to have a lot of faith that ultimately something was going to work out. And, it's funny, it did. And we could have profiled another 100 more people that have done things like that. So that's kind of what's going on here.
Well, I think you touched on something that I think is so critical in our society right now. One, that people are so siloed, and two, I think people are hopeless. People are looking for hope and looking for something that will encourage them. And I think many people are still, as you mentioned, kind of up to their nose in all of this political stuff. But eventually they're going to come up for air and realize, this actually isn't providing me the hope and encouragement and the promise that I thought politics was. It's a great vehicle for making some political change, but it makes for one lousy religion. So talk about the
Well,
importance
Trey, think about it this way. Think about it this way.
Yeah.
Because all politics are local and all change comes from the bottom up. So think about this for a second. If the Secretary of State and your trash man went on vacation, who would you miss the most?
I'm going to miss the trash guy the most, I think.
Of course you are. and so when people are distraught politically or culturally, or, everything's crashing down around me, you're not powerless. Do something. Because I like to talk about my wife's mission. She doesn't even call it a mission, but I do. And that's her visiting what she calls the olds. These are people who are older, who can be lonely and don't have family visiting them. And she goes and sees them on a regular basis. And, she gets a lot of joy out of it. And they get a lot of joy out of it. She just wishes they'd live a little longer, but that's all part of it. And she's had great joy and great sadness by creating these relationships, but pretty good mission, don't you think?
Yeah.
Just think if the church has decided, loneliness is one of the greatest epidemics in the country today. Think if we all just made a commitment to go visit somebody who was lonely. I mean, It could change everything.
Well, you've spent years in politics, so you have spent years in probably the most divisive field that there is, and now you're talking about coming together and being united and not dividing ourselves. How did you kind of square that round hole when it came to being a politician?
Well, first of all, I'm a Republican, but my political party was my vehicle and not my master. I had some of the great friends in the world who I didn't agree with 90% of the time, but we found some common things to work on. Defense reform, helping, the environment. There were many things that I was engaged in, fighting poverty in Africa. There are many things that I could reach out and find common purpose with people of the other party. I've enjoyed it. I never thought of myself as anything other than a person in there to do. And again, if the party's your vehicle, not your master, it gives you great freedom. And the increasing discovery of faith also gave me a certain joy to work with others. And some of them are still great friends of mine. Politicians, they're kind of there and then they leave and they forget people. But there's still some of them that I like very much. So it was an easy transition to talk about that. And, and I'm still engaged in a lot of debates and discussions. But the key is I don't have to agree with somebody to like them. And I don't have to hate them because they see things differently than I do. Yeah. At times it's frustrating. I mean, I'm just a human being. At times I'm like, this person's a knucklehead. But at the end of it all, it's better to work with somebody than fight with them.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, did you ever envision that after years of being in the public square as a politician, you would be somebody who's now an author and on television, really with the steady drumbeat of unify?
Yeah, it's just life is interesting, twists and turns. And I don't know. I just figure that I just try to get those signals. What the heck's the Lord want me to do? Even though most of the time I'm deaf and I can't hear what he's saying or don't care what he's saying. But, a lot of the time some of the time, it gets through. And it's cool. It's cool to be out here as somebody who spends so much of their life in politics, but in faith. But I think now, to be honest with you, Trey, there are more and more people that understand that that's kind of who I am, that I'm still political, but that I have faith and, that I'm a guy that tries. And I find they respect it. And for some reason, when I talk about these things, whether it's on a college campus or wherever it is, I don't get a lot of pushback. It's I don't know, for some reason, the way I say it or work about it, it just is not offensive to people. I hope I can keep doing that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, everybody, we're going to fit in one more quick break. We'll be right back to wrap up our conversation with Governor Kasich. Be right back. Welcome back to Faith versus Culture. We're joined by Governor John Kasich. Governor Kasich, you have this new book, Heaven Help Us. And I want to ask you, as we're kind of wrapping up our conversation, what gives you hope for the next generation?
Well, Trey, you and I have talked in the past about how we're seeing more and more young people gravitate. I know at Ohio State University, they're exploding at the seams with young people going to church. And, you saw the Ohio State football program, they're praying all the time and they're real about it. And we see more and more athletes on television beginning to talk about their faith. And I think that COVID really is, kind of taken us back in many respects to ground zero for young people. And I think they're looking for something that they can believe in, something they can navigate. And it's really largely Bible oriented, which is really something. So, I'm always pretty hopeful. I think the reserve inside the American people, because we do, even if it's not renewed as much as we would like, that Judeo-Christian ethic has embodied people with a sense of responsibility, and really in many respects, to love your neighbor. And sometimes it doesn't always seem that way, but we see in times of tragedy, and even in times of celebration, we can see people coming together to celebrate something good or to work together to get through something that's difficult. Yeah, I'm hopeful.
Sure.
I've been around politics for a long time. I started as a very young man. I'm still going like crazy in many different things, and I'm still an idealist, and I still believe that in the end, our country will weather these storms, and we'll be better off for it.
Well, Governor John Kasich, thank you so much for joining us today.
Great, thank you. It's been a good day.
All right, everybody,
God
stick
bless.
with us. We'll be right back to wrap up this week's episode. That is all the time we have for this week's episode of Faith versus Culture here on the CBN News channel. Thank you so much for joining us for that conversation with Governor Kasich. If you want more news from a Christian perspective, head on over to cbnnews.com. You can always catch the news of the day there. And also check out our Quick Start podcast. It goes out every weekday morning where we cover the news from a gospel perspective. That's something that is desperately needed in our culture today. Again, thanks for being here, and God bless you.